Okay, so the past couple of days we've been taking an equation and we've been working to identify certain things about the equation so that we can, yesterday, put it on a graph. Okay? Today we're going to go the other way. So I'm going to give you a graph and we need to pick out information so that we can write the equation that matches the graph. Okay? So let's talk about some things that we identify when we actually graph. So what's the first thing you typically look at?
Shape.
All right, the shape would be good. Is it a sine or is it a cosine? All right. That will affect if we need to write. Okay. Then what do you identify for your graph? Like what's the first thing after sine or cosine that you identify for this? Positive or negative. Okay, so is it going to go down or is it going to go up? Then
Amplitude.
the amplitude. And how do you identify the amplitude? Oh, see you still.
The coefficient on cosine or sine.
Okay, which we've been calling A. All right. So the absolute value of A tells us our amplitude. Okay. The shape that Peyton talked about will tell us whether we need to make A positive or negative when we write it in our equation. Okay. All right. After we figure out the amplitude, what's the next thing you picked out? Period. Ethan, how do you identify the period? Okay. You would identify the period as 2 pi divided by b. So you took b, 2 pi divided by b, and then you knew how long to make your frame. Okay? Then what did you pick out?
Starting point.
I bet it was the starting point. And we identify the starting point. How? C divided by b comma d. Okay? Now what we have to do is we have to look at our graph and determine what is the shape, what is the amplitude, what is the period, what is the starting point so that we can identify A, B, C, and D. Okay? So we are still using this same 3 pieces of information for A, B, C, and D, but now we have to work backwards. So we're going to have to set up some equations maybe to solve for some of these. I mean, very simple. But we're going to have to go from the graph to getting those values. Okay? So notes really wouldn't take very long if you didn't have to draw the picture. But I'm going to make you draw each of these graphs so that when you go back and look at your notes next week when you're studying for your test, you know where the heck you got 2 pi over 3 from. Okay? So please take a couple minutes and draw this graph into your notes. If you didn't want to label everything, at least get the -2 and +2. The x and y axis are important. And then at the very least, this 2 pi over 3 is an important number. So I'll give you some time. All right, do we have it drawn? Anybody need more time? Speak now. You need that point. So it may help to actually draw a frame around this so that we can compare everything to what we've been doing using our framing method. Okay, you don't have to, but it could help. All right, so if you want to, go ahead and draw a frame around it. And we're going to identify everything just like we would before. So first of all, do we have a sine or a cosine curve? We have a cosine. So when I write my equation, I know that I need the cosine. Okay? Is it a normal cosine curve or reflected? Normal. So we know that when we identify A is going to be positive. All right? Okay. Now, our amplitude. Bree, what would the amplitude of this curve be? 2. Okay. We have a total vertical height of 4 because our frame stretches from -2 to +2. But remember, amplitude is half the vertical height. So our amplitude is 2. So we know that that A coefficient of cosine needs to be a +2 because of the amplitude and of the shape. All right. The period is the length horizontally of our frame. Well, it makes it easy when our frame begins at x equals 0, right? Our frame begins at x equals 0 and it ends at 2 pi over 3. What's the period? 2 pi over 3. Okay. The period is 2 pi over 3. Well, we know to calculate the period, we take 2 pi divided by b. So what is b? And then remember that is that a question? Nope, not a question. Okay, remember that our starting point is on the edge of our frame, but in the middle. I don't care where cosine is starting. Our starting point is right here. Okay, which is which coordinate? Okay. Trying to use my left hand. Okay. So since our starting point is 0, 0, we do not need to worry about a C or a D, and there is our equation for this graph. Not bad, right? Okay. Any questions on that graph? Makes it nice when it starts at 0, 0 because then that's 2 less things that you have to identify. So let's go ahead and look at a graph that maybe doesn't start exactly at 0, 0. Okay? I will give you a few minutes to draw this graph in your notes. Does anybody need more time to draw it? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and draw a frame around this. Since that's how we've been graphing using the framing method. Okay, so let's go ahead and start out with the shape. Is this a sine or cosine graph? This is a sine graph. Normal or reflected? It is a reflected sine graph, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my A is negative because this S goes down first instead of up. Okay. So now let's look at the amplitude. Okay. Olivia, what is our amplitude? 4. We have a total vertical height of 8 because we're stretching from -2 to +6. So half of that vertical height would be our amplitude of 4. So A is -4. Negative because of the reflection, 4 because of the amplitude. Okay. Now our frame does begin at x equals 0. And it ends at x equals 2. So horizontally, what's the length of that frame? 2. Which means the period is 2. Now we calculate the period by taking 2 pi divided by b. What is b? B is pi. Okay. Now so far we've had really nice values for b where we can just kind of like look at it and tell. If it's not as obvious, cross multiplying is a great way to solve a proportion, okay, which is what we're working with here. Okay. Then our starting point, okay, for sine it's nice because that is where the sine graph starts. Our starting point is at 0, 2, okay, which means we don't have a c value. And we have a vertical shift of 2, so we'll put +2 at the very end of our equation. Sorry, is that better? I raised it up for you because you're.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Any questions there? You're ready for more, right? All right. Take a couple minutes and draw this one. It will be our last one. So I'll go ahead and put a frame on this. What kind of curve are we working with? Cosine normal? Not normal. We have a reflected cosine curve. Okay? A reflected cosine curve that has an amplitude of what? Allie, what's our amplitude? 2. Okay? We have a total vertical height of 4 because we're stretching from -2 to +2. So our amplitude is 2. Okay, so A is a -2 because of the reflection and the amplitude. Now, here is where not starting at 0 is going to make a little bit more work for us in the case of identifying the period. The period is not pi/2. That's where our frame ends, but our frame begins at -pi/6. How do we determine the length horizontally? Okay. And then do what? Okay. Anytime we want a length, we need to know what the difference is from end to beginning. So our period, we are going to take the place where it ends and subtract the place where it begins. Okay, so we have 3 pi/6 plus pi/6, which gives us 4 pi/6 or 2 pi/3. So our period is 2 pi/3. We had to do a little bit of work to get that. If you have a horizontal shift, you will have to do the end minus beginning to get that horizontal length. Okay? Now we calculate the period by taking 2 pi divided by b. So our b value is 3. Now remember, the starting point is in the middle of the left edge of our frame. It's not where the cosine graph starts. Okay, but in this case, our starting point is -pi/6, 0. All right, well, d is 0. We can tell that right away. But remember, the x-coordinate of our starting point, we calculate by taking c divided by b. All right, so in order to calculate our c value, we need to take our x-coordinate, and that needs to equal c divided by b. Do we know b? We know b. We know b to be 3. So now we can solve for c by multiplying this 3 over. And since we have a shift to the left, pi/2, I need to make sure that this is 3x plus pi/2. Yes? We knew that b is 3 because of the period. So our period was 2 pi divided by 3. And we know that the period, we calculate 2 pi divided by b. So if our period's 2 pi/3, we can identify b to be 3. Well, we had to find the 2 pi/3 by this up here. So the period is the horizontal length. So since we did not begin at 0, we took this very right endpoint and subtracted the very left endpoint to get the 2 pi/3. So we get it from the graph, but we got to do a little bit of work to get it from the graph. If we don't begin at x equals 0, then we actually have to do a calculation for the period. Yeah. Other questions on this guy right here? All right. We have 6 minutes left, which is enough time for you to get the front side of your worksheet done. Because the front side does not have very many shifts.
I can change it.